Good morning. The passage before us today, Matthew 6, verses 19 to 24, headed in the New Testament, Treasures in Heaven. Now, I must confess that when I did the preparation for this, it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. So to begin with, the upward journey to that point of overview was relatively straightforward. But when I started to come down and to dig down into the depth of what it meant in practice, the ride became much more challenging. And so this morning I'd like to invite you to come onto the roller coaster with me if you're prepared to be challenged by what this passage actually says to us. To begin with then, the overview is straightforward. The first section is all about treasures in heaven versus treasures on earth. The definition of treasure in the dictionary is a quantity of precious things, metals, gems, or other valuable items. So it's a question of what we regard as valuable. Do we regard the things of earth as valuable and store those up? Or do we regard the things of heaven as valuable and store those? The middle part of this passage is about the eyes. It talks about the good eyes being admitting light because you're looking at the source of light and hope. And then it talks about bad eyes and the darkness that comes from looking at the wrong things. So there's a contrast again. Previously it was about riches in earth and riches in heaven. Now it's about what you look at. Do you look at the light or do you look at the darkness? And the third thing in this passage is the very stark last verse, where Jesus very bluntly says, you can't serve God and money. He's basically saying, make up your mind. Which one is it going to be? Now, Jesus actually was quite blunt about this subject in lots of places. If you read through the Gospels, you find it time and time again. A quick look at some of them just quickly. For example, in Matthew 21, we find he goes into the temple and he overturns the tables of the money changers. He sees that commercialization, that earthly transaction that was taking place as spoiling the house of prayer, the temple, the presence of God. And then in Luke chapter 12, we find that he tells his disciples not to worry about your life, he says. What you will eat. Don't worry about your body and what you will wear. Life is more than all these things. And then he goes on to tell them in verse 33, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Treasures in heaven will not wear out. And it begs the question, that verse, where is our treasure? In Luke 18, he meets the rich young man, sometimes called the rich young ruler, who's described as being a man of great wealth. And of course, he says, well, I'm doing everything right. I go to the temple, I say my prayers, I do everything that I should be doing. But Jesus points straight away to his wealth. And he says, go and sell everything that you have, give it to the poor, and then come back and follow me. And it describes the man as being very sad because, of course, his attachment to his wealth was so great. And that's true for us. Where is the attachment of our heart? Is it attached to earthly things or to God? And Jesus goes on in that passage in verse 24 and 25 to talk about how hard it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. In fact, he says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. It is difficult, he says, for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. I'm guessing that's because the presumption is that a rich person's attention and heart and sight are on earthly treasures and wealth, rather than the treasures of heaven. In Mark 12, the story of the widow's offering is another example where Jesus is quite blunt. He sees the widow offering the little that she has, and he says, all these other people, they've given out of their wealth, out of their surplus. But this woman, she gave out of her poverty. She put in everything that she had, everything that she had. And that's such a contrast, again, that he brings out in that passage. So Jesus is not saying it just once, he says it many times. Make up your mind. What drives you? Is it money or is it God? Now, as I started to unpack what this meant for me, decided to look at some statistics and say, well, what is wealth exactly? Who is wealthy and who isn't? Um, and so I went on the internet and looked up some sites that gave some perspectives. So I learned, for example, that the average wage across the world is £2,500 per annum, £2,500 per annum, or £208 per month. In the UK, it's approximately 10 times that. The average wage is somewhere around 26,000, which comes to over £2,000 a month. And that puts you in the top 10% of the wealthiest earnings in the world. And of course, if there are 10 times people like us in the UK who are 10 times the world average, for that to be an average, it means that there are lots of people who are 10 times less than that average in the world. If we are in the top 10%, then there are 90% below us. And even if you look at benefits, job seekers allowance is £320 per month. On top of that, you will get housing benefit for your rent to be paid. You get free healthcare, free education and sanitary conditions. The minimum wage is £8.72 per hour, or £323 per month, per week rather, or £1,400 per month. All of those way over the average wage of the world. So it begins to beg the question, in this country, are we wealthy? And at least in monetary terms, the answer is yes, we are. We are well off compared with the majority of people in the world. And yet the UK mindset doesn't say that. The UK mindset is all about we're poor, life is hard, we need more money for this, we want more of this, we would deserve a pay rise every year, but more and more and more. And we focus on being successful in terms of our salary level, or the size of our pension pot, or our house and its value, or a car that we drive, or the holidays that we take. Where this began to strike home for me recently was in the COVID-19 lockdown in March. I read in the paper at that time about Sudan. Sudan went into a lockdown shortly after the UK. They have a population of 43 million people. The UK, approximately 68 million. They had, according to this article, 3 ventilators in hospitals across the whole of the country, just 3. So if you prorated that to the UK population, that would mean the UK would have 5. Now you imagine if the UK had 5 ventilators at lockdown when the hospitals were being overwhelmed by COVID patients. There would be a riot. And yet when God looks down on it, does he see the UK life as more important than the life of a person in Sudan? So when it came to PPE, protective equipment, the country was up in arms because the hospitals didn't have enough, care homes didn't have enough. And government buyers were out around the world. And effectively, to get the PPE for this country, they had to outbid other countries and other buyers. So effectively, the wealth of the country determined how much you were able to acquire. And again, it begs the question, is a Sudanese life more important or less important than a UK life? When God looks down on his world, how does he equate the two? I began to form the view that the truth was this, that as a Western Christian, I am influenced by the world and its view of wealth, and I am still too attached to the financial things of this world. And I have a journey to continue to unpack that and to loosen my grip on my wealth and my possessions and all those things. Jesus' teaching is very blunt. Am I to serve God and seek the treasures of heaven, or am I to serve money and seek the treasures of the world? Now, money itself is not evil. It's how we hold it, what we're prepared to do with it, and how we're prepared to share it that is the test of where our treasure and where our heart really is. Now, I've read these next verses to you before, and I will read them again because they sum up what we're talking about again today. In Colossians 3, verse 1 and 2, for example, set your hearts on the things that are above, where Christ is, at the right hand of God. Set your hearts on the things above. Verse 2, set your minds on the things that are above, not on earthly things. And in Matthew chapter 6, verse 22, this passage, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. Where you look determines the fullness of God within you. Look to God and you are filled with his love, his compassion, his light and his spirit. But verse 22 says, if your eyes are bad, then your whole body will be full of darkness. When we look away from God to the things of the world, then it is in contrast to the glory and the love and the generosity of God's heart. In Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. That is your spiritual worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So back to Jesus and verse 24. You can't serve God and money. You can't have two masters. Jesus is saying then and now, make up your mind. Are you serving the world and the world's standards? Does that frame your life and how you judge things and what you do with your life and your possessions and your situation? Or are you gazing at God, the things that are above, the treasures of heaven, and are you being filled with him and his judgment on life and the things that his heart is asking of us? Is your life full of light, or is your life full of darkness? Do you look to store up treasures on earth or treasures in heaven? For me, the roller coaster ride was very uncomfortable. I wonder how you find these words of Jesus. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve God and money. God bless you.